4 psychological experiments that should have never happened. Science requires sacrifice. Progress demands experimentation. Knowledge comes at a cost. But sometimes, the cost is paid by people who never agreed to it. Today, we're not discussing thought experiments or theoretical paradoxes. We're talking about real experiments conducted by real scientists on real human beings and animals. Experiments that crossed every ethical line. Experiments that destroyed lives. Experiments that revealed truths about human nature so disturbing that some researchers wished they'd never looked. These 4 experiments changed psychology forever. They answered questions we desperately needed answered. But they did it through methods that should horrify you. First, the split brain experiments that proved you might be 2 people trapped in one body. Then, the pit of despair, where baby monkeys were tortured to prove that love is a biological necessity. Third, the Stanford prison experiment, where college students became monsters in less than 2 days. And finally, the God helmet, where scientists tried to artificially create religious experiences and discovered something terrifying about consciousness itself. By the end of this video, you'll understand why ethics committees exist, why some questions shouldn't be answered, and why the pursuit of knowledge can become indistinguishable from cruelty. These experiments should have never happened. But they did. And we have to live with what they revealed. Let's begin with the experiment that proved you might not be one person at all. Chapter 1. The split brain experiments. When cutting your brain creates 2 people. Imagine waking up from surgery to discover you're no longer one person. You're 2 separate consciousnesses sharing the same body. 2 minds with different thoughts, different desires, different personalities. Both of them you. Neither of them fully you. This isn't science fiction. This happened to real people. In the 1960s, neurosurgeon Joseph Bogan and neuropsychologist Roger Spade began performing an experimental surgery on patients with severe epilepsy. The surgery was radical. They would cut the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers connecting the left and right hemispheres of the brain. The theory was simple. Epileptic seizures spread from one hemisphere to the other through this connection. Cut the connection, and seizures could only affect half the brain at a time, making them less severe and easier to control. It worked. The seizures decreased dramatically. Patients could function better, live more normal lives. But then researchers noticed something strange. These split-brain patients started behaving oddly. They would do things with one hand while the other hand tried to stop them. They would pick out clothes with their right hand, and their left hand would put them back. They would try to hug their wife with one arm while the other arm pushed her away. It was as if 2 different people were controlling the same body. Roger Spade designed a series of experiments to understand what was happening. And what he discovered won him a Nobel Prize. But it also revealed something profoundly disturbing about consciousness. Here's how the tests worked. Researchers would show split-brain patients images or words, but only to one eye at a time. Because of how the brain is wired, information from your right eye goes primarily to your left hemisphere, and vice versa. Normally, the corpus callosum instantly shares this information between hemispheres. But in split-brain patients, that connection was gone. So when researchers showed an image to the right eye, processed by the left hemisphere, which controls language, patients could describe what they saw. They could say, "I see an apple." But when researchers showed an image to the left eye, processed by the right hemisphere, which doesn't control speech, patients would say they saw nothing. Yet when asked to draw what they saw with their left hand, they would draw the image perfectly. One half of their brain saw something, knew it, could respond to it. But the other half had no idea. And because the speaking half didn't know, the patients would insist they saw nothing, even while their hand was drawing the exact image they claimed not to see. They were lying. But they weren't lying. Half of them was telling the truth. The other half genuinely didn't know. Because they weren't one person anymore. They were 2. One patient described trying to button his shirt with one hand while the other hand unbuttoned it. Another reported that his left hand would sometimes grab his wife aggressively, and he would have to use his right hand to pull it away, apologizing while still gripping her. One woman said she would open the refrigerator with her right hand to get food, and her left hand would slam it shut. She described it as fighting with myself constantly. The most disturbing case involved a patient whose right hemisphere, the non-speaking side, had different opinions than his left. When researchers asked his speaking hemisphere about his career plans, he said he wanted to be a draftsman. But when they asked his right hemisphere to spell out answers using letter tiles that only it could see, it spelled out automobile racer. 2 different career goals. 2 different personalities. 2 different people. And here's what makes this truly horrifying. Before the surgery, this patient was one person with one set of desires. The surgery didn't add anything. It only removed the connection between hemispheres. Which means both of these people already existed inside him, unified by the corpus callosum into what felt like a single consciousness. You have 2 hemispheres. 2 separate processing centers that can function independently. The only reason you experience yourself as one person is because they're connected. They share information so seamlessly that you never notice you're actually 2 systems working together. But split brain patients prove that connection is everything. Without it, you become 2 separate streams of consciousness. 2 different decision makers. 2 people who share a body but might not share the same thoughts, desires, or even sense of self. So which one is really you? The hemisphere that can speak? The one that controls language and describes itself as I? Or are both equally you? Are you the combination? Or are you one consciousness that got split into 2? Philosophy has grappled with this for decades. Because split brain experiments prove that consciousness is not singular. It's not some unified soul or ghost in the machine. It's a function of brain architecture. And that architecture can be divided. Modern neuroscience has confirmed this. Split brain patients' hemispheres can learn different things, prefer different music, have different emotional responses. They are, by every measurable standard, 2 separate conscious entities. And here's the ethical nightmare. None of these patients consented to becoming 2 people. They consented to reducing their seizures. They had no idea that cutting that connection would fundamentally alter their consciousness. That it would create a second self inside them that might want different things. That might fight them for control of their own body. The surgery is rarely performed now, partly because of these disturbing implications. But the patients who underwent it still live with the consequences. Still experience themselves as divided. Still fight against their own hands. Still wonder which side is really them. The split brain experiments taught us that consciousness is modular. Divisible. Not the unified, singular thing we experience it as. Your sense of being one person is an illusion created by 2 hemispheres communicating so efficiently that you never notice the seams. But the seams are there. And they can be cut. And when they are, you stop being one person and become 2. These experiments revealed profound truths about the nature of consciousness. But they did it by creating people who are fundamentally divided against themselves. People who will never again experience the unity of self that you and I take for granted. But at least those patients were adults who made some kind of choice, even if they didn't understand it. Our next experiment offered no such mercy. No choice. No understanding. Only suffering. Let's talk about the pit of despair. Chapter 2. The pit of despair. When scientists tortured baby monkeys to prove love is real in the 1950s, a psychologist named Harry Harlow decided to prove something that seemed obvious, that love is real. That attachment is a biological need, not just a learned behavior. That infants need more than food and shelter, they need affection. To prove this, he tortured baby monkeys until they went insane. And the worst part is, he succeeded. He proved love is real. He proved isolation destroys the mind. He proved that emotional connection is as necessary as food or water. But the cost was hundreds of infant monkeys, psychologically destroyed beyond repair. And one man's descent into alcoholism and depression, haunted by what he had done. Harry Harlow was not a sadist. He was a respected scientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. His goal was noble, to prove that the prevailing psychological theory of his time, behaviorism, was wrong about attachment. Behaviorists believed that babies bonded with their mothers purely because mothers provided food. Love was just a conditioned response. Feed a baby, and it learns to associate you with satisfaction. That's all attachment was. A learned behavior. Nothing more. Harlow thought this was nonsense. He believed attachment was deeper. Biological. That infants needed comfort, not just calories. And he set out to prove it. He started with the famous wire-mother experiments. Harlow separated infant rhesus monkeys from their biological mothers and gave them 2 artificial mothers. One was made of wire mesh with a bottle of milk attached, the wire mother who provided food. The other was made of soft cloth wrapped around a wooden frame, the cloth mother who provided no food, only comfort. If behaviorists were right, the baby monkeys should prefer the wire mother. She fed them. She kept them alive. According to behaviorist theory, they should bond with her. But they didn't. The baby monkeys spent almost all their time clinging to the cloth mother. They only went to the wire mother briefly to feed, then immediately returned to the comfort of the cloth. When frightened by a loud noise or a mechanical toy, the babies didn't run to the mother who fed them. They ran to the mother who felt soft, who provided comfort, even though she gave them nothing but texture. Harlow had proven his point. Attachment wasn't about food. It was about comfort, about touch, about feeling safe. But he didn't stop there. Because those baby monkeys, despite preferring the cloth mother, still grew up disturbed. They rocked back and forth. They bit themselves. They were fearful and antisocial. The cloth mother was better than the wire mother, but neither was good enough. So Harlow decided to find out what happens when you remove comfort entirely. He built what he called the Pit of Despair. The Pit of Despair was a vertical isolation chamber. Stainless steel walls. No windows. No light except what filtered from the top. A sloped bottom so the infant monkey would slide down and have difficulty climbing out. Completely isolated. No contact with other monkeys. No stimulation. Nothing. Baby monkeys were placed in these chambers for weeks at a time. Sometimes months. The results were catastrophic. Within days, the infant monkeys would stop moving. They would huddle at the bottom of the chamber, rocking back and forth. They would bite themselves. Pull out their own hair. Some would scream continuously. Others would go silent, completely unresponsive. When removed from the pit, they were fundamentally broken. They couldn't interact with other monkeys. They sat in corners, staring at nothing. They were terrified of everything. Many became permanently catatonic. Some had been placed in the pit for just a few weeks. It didn't matter. The damage was permanent and irreversible. Harlow knew what he was doing. He knew he was creating suffering. In his own words, he said he was producing a psychopathological animal. He compared his chambers to concentration camps. He named them with dark humor: the Well of Despair, the Dungeon of Despair, the Tunnel of Doom. He knew. And he did it anyway. But he had proven his point. Isolation is torture. Not just unpleasant. Torture at a neurological level. The infant brain requires social connection to develop properly. Without it, the mind breaks. Permanently. Harlow's experiments revolutionized developmental psychology. They proved that attachment is a biological need. They showed that orphanages needed to provide more than just food and shelter. They needed to provide love, touch, human connection. They changed how we think about child rearing, about the importance of parental bonding, about what infants actually need to become functional adults. Lives were saved because of this research. Countless human children benefited from understanding the importance of attachment. But hundreds of infant monkeys were destroyed to gain that knowledge. And the man who conducted these experiments couldn't escape what he'd done. Harry Harlow's wife died of cancer in the 1970s. He fell into a deep depression. He started drinking heavily. He underwent electroshock therapy. Colleagues reported that he seemed haunted. That he would stare into space. That he seemed to be carrying an unbearable weight. Some believe the guilt of what he'd done to those monkeys destroyed him. That he couldn't reconcile the scientific value of his work with the suffering he'd caused. That he had proven love was real by creating a hell of lovelessness, and the irony broke him. He died in 1981, reportedly still struggling with depression and alcoholism. His final years were marked by the same isolation and despair he had studied. As if the universe had imposed a cruel symmetry on his life. The Pit of Despair experiments are no longer conducted. Ethical review boards would never approve them today. We know what isolation does now. We don't need to prove it again. But we only know it because Harry Harlow proved it. By taking infant monkeys and systematically destroying their minds. By creating suffering to understand suffering. By building hell to prove that hell is real. The question remains, was it worth it? Did the knowledge justify the cost? Can we accept the benefits of research conducted through methods we now consider monstrous? There's no good answer. Only the uncomfortable reality that much of what we know about psychology came from experiments that should never have happened. But at least Harlow's subjects were animals. Our next experiment used human beings. College students who thought they were participating in a simple study. Students who had no idea they were about to discover the monster inside themselves. Let's talk about the Stanford Prison Experiment. Chapter 3: The Stanford Prison Experiment When Good People Became Monsters. In 36 Hours in 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo placed an ad in a local newspaper. Male college students needed for psychological study of prison life. $15 per day for 1 to 2 weeks. 75 men responded. After screening for psychological stability, criminal background, and medical issues, Zimbardo selected 24. All normal, healthy, middle-class college students. No history of violence. No psychological problems. Just average young men who wanted to earn some summer money. Zimbardo randomly assigned them to 2 groups, prisoners and guards. Then he built a mock prison in the basement of Stanford Psychology Department. Cells. A solitary confinement closet. An observation room. The experiment was supposed to last 2 weeks. It lasted 6 days. Because in less than 36 hours, the guards became sadistic. The prisoners became broken. And everyone involved, including Zimbardo himself, lost the ability to tell the difference between the experiment and reality. This is the story of how situational forces can transform normal people into monsters. How roles and uniforms and authority can override personality and morality. How all of us are capable of cruelty under the right conditions. Or at least, that's what we've been told. On the first day, the prisoners were arrested at their homes by real Palo Alto police. They were fingerprinted, blindfolded, and driven to the makeshift prison. They were stripped, searched, deloused, and given prison uniforms, loose smocks with ID numbers, no underwear. They were given nylon stocking caps to simulate shaved heads. Chains on their ankles. The guards were given identical khaki uniforms, whistles, batons, and mirrored sunglasses so prisoners couldn't see their eyes. They were told to maintain order but given no specific instructions on how. Zimbardo told them, you can create in the prisoners feelings of boredom, a sense of fear to some degree, you can create a notion of arbitrariness. For the first day, nothing dramatic happened. The guards were awkward, unsure how to act. The prisoners joked around, didn't take it seriously. It felt like a game. But by the second day, everything changed. The prisoners staged a rebellion. They barricaded themselves in their cells using their beds. They taunted the guards. They ripped off their ID numbers. The guards responded with force. They sprayed fire extinguishers into the cells. They stripped the prisoners naked. They made them do push-ups. They started using psychological tactics, taking away mattresses, denying bathroom privileges, forcing prisoners to clean toilets with their bare hands. And it escalated. Rapidly. Guards woke prisoners in the middle of the night for counts that would last hours. They forced them to do push-ups while guards stepped on their backs. They made prisoners sing songs. Recite ID numbers. Do jumping jacks. All while hurling insults. They put prisoners in solitary confinement, a tiny closet, 4 hours at a time. They denied them food. They made them clean out toilet bowls with their bare hands, then wouldn't let them wash. Some guards became particularly cruel. One guard, nicknamed John Wayne by prisoners, seemed to relish his authority. He invented degrading punishments. He mocked prisoners. He enforced rules arbitrarily, punishing some prisoners while rewarding others for the same behavior. And the prisoners broke. Within 36 hours, one prisoner, prisoner number 8612, started showing signs of acute psychological distress. He began screaming, crying. His thinking became disorganized. He told Zimbardo, I feel really fucked up inside. I want out. Zimbardo, who was acting not just as lead researcher but as prison superintendent, thought the prisoner was trying to fake his way out of the experiment. He told him to return to the prison and be a good prisoner. The man complied, then his breakdown intensified. He had to be released after just 36 hours. More prisoners broke down over the following days. They cried. They became passive. They developed psychosomatic rashes. They stopped resisting. They internalized their prisoner identity so completely that when offered parole hearings, which were meaningless in an experiment, most said they'd give up their payment just to be released. But when denied parole, they went back to their cells rather than simply quitting. They had forgotten it was an experiment. On day 6, Zimbardo's girlfriend, Christina Maslach, visited the prison. She was a graduate student in psychology. She watched the guards lead prisoners on bathroom runs, prisoners with bags over their heads, chained together, being pushed and mocked. She was horrified. She told Zimbardo he had created something terrible, that he had to stop. Zimbardo, who had been fully immersed in his role as superintendent, suddenly saw what he'd been blind to for days. He shut down the experiment immediately. For decades, the Stanford Prison Experiment was taught as proof of how situations can corrupt good people, how roles and systems can override individual morality, how all of us, under the right circumstances, can become capable of cruelty. But recent investigations have revealed serious problems with the experiment. Recordings and documents show that Zimbardo and his team weren't passive observers. They actively encouraged guards to be tougher. They coached specific behaviors. The guard who became most sadistic later admitted that he was acting, playing a role he thought the experimenters wanted. Many guards didn't become cruel. Some were uncomfortable with the whole situation. The ones who did become abusive might have been responding to perceived experimenter demand, doing what they thought would make the study successful. And the prisoners' breakdowns, while real, might have been exacerbated by Zimbardo treating them as if they were actual prisoners rather than volunteers who could leave at any time. He created ambiguity about whether they could quit, making them feel trapped. So what does the Stanford Prison Experiment actually prove? Maybe not that normal people inevitably become evil in bad situations. Maybe something more specific, that when authority figures create an environment encouraging cruelty, some people will comply. That roles and uniforms can provide permission for behavior people might otherwise resist. That ambiguity about whether you can leave a harmful situation makes you more likely to endure it. Or maybe it just proves that poorly controlled experiments where the lead researcher is also a participant can produce results shaped more by experimenter bias than by fundamental truths about human nature. Either way, the Stanford Prison Experiment harmed real people. Prisoners developed lasting psychological issues. Guards had to confront the fact that they'd been cruel to innocent people. Zimbardo himself admitted he lost his moral bearings, becoming so absorbed in his role that he couldn't see the suffering he was orchestrating. The experiment revealed something, but maybe not what we thought. Maybe not that we're all monsters waiting for permission. Maybe just that experiments can themselves be harmful. That researchers can become so invested in their studies that they cross ethical lines without realizing it. That the pursuit of knowledge about cruelty can become cruel itself. But at least the Stanford Prison Experiment studied social behavior, human interaction, systems and roles. Our final experiment went deeper. It tried to hack consciousness itself, to artificially create religious experiences, to make people feel God through electromagnetic fields. And what it discovered was far more disturbing than anyone expected. Let's talk about the God helmet. Chapter 4. The God helmet. When scientists tried to create God in a laboratory, what if every religious experience in human history, every vision of God, every moment of spiritual transcendence, every feeling of divine presence, was just a brain malfunction? A misfiring of neurons in your temporal lobes creating the illusion of something greater? What if we could create that experience artificially? Flip a switch and make you feel God. In the 1980s, a neuroscientist named Michael Persinger claimed he could do exactly that. His device was called the Corin helmet, but everyone knew it as the God helmet. It looked like a modified motorcycle helmet with electromagnetic coils attached. When you wore it, weak electromagnetic fields would stimulate specific regions of your brain, particularly the temporal lobes. And according to Persinger, this stimulation could make you experience the presence of God. The temporal lobes sit on the sides of your brain, just above your ears. They're involved in processing sensory input, memory, and, importantly, giving meaning to experiences. When the temporal lobes are overactive or damaged, strange things happen. People with temporal lobe epilepsy often report intense religious experiences. They see visions, hear voices, feel overwhelming spiritual presence. They have profound revelations about the nature of reality. They meet God, angels, demons. These aren't metaphorical. They're genuine, overwhelming sensory experiences that feel completely real. More real than normal reality. Persinger theorized that all religious experiences might work this way. That what mystics and prophets experienced wasn't contact with the divine, but temporary hyperactivity in their temporal lobes. That Moses seeing the burning bush, Paul's conversion on the road to Damascus, Muhammad's revelations, all of it might have been neurological events, not supernatural ones. And if that were true, if religious experiences were just brain states, then theoretically, you could create those states artificially. So he built the God helmet. The procedure was simple. Subjects would sit in a quiet, Dark room. They'd put on the helmet. Weak electromagnetic fields would stimulate their temporal lobes for about 20 to 30 minutes. Then researchers would ask what they experienced. And subjects reported extraordinary things. Many felt a presence in the room with them. Something or someone else was there. They couldn't see it, but they knew it existed. Some described it as God. Others as an angel, a spirit, a deceased loved one. Some just said a presence, without being able to identify it. Some experienced profound spiritual feelings. Oneness with the universe. Cosmic unity. The dissolution of the boundary between self and everything else. They felt connected to all existence in a way they'd never experienced before. Others had terrifying experiences. They felt evil presences. Demonic entities. Overwhelming dread. The same device, different interpretations. Persinger tested over 900 people. He claimed about 80% experienced some kind of unusual presence or sensation. He published papers arguing that this proved religious experiences were neurological, not supernatural. If you could create the experience of God with electromagnetic fields, then God wasn't real. God was just neurons firing in a specific pattern. But there was a problem. Other researchers tried to replicate Persinger's results. And they couldn't. A Swedish team ran a double-blind study where neither the experimenters nor the subjects knew who was getting real electromagnetic stimulation and who was getting a placebo. They found no significant difference between groups. People wearing the active helmet reported the same kinds of experiences as people wearing an inactive helmet. Other replication attempts failed similarly. When proper controls were in place, the God helmet didn't seem to do anything special. People had experiences, but they had them whether the device was on or off. Which suggested that what Persinger was measuring wasn't electromagnetic stimulation of the temporal lobes. It was suggestion. Expectation. The power of being in a dark room with weird equipment on your head told you might experience something supernatural. Persinger defended his work. He argued that other researchers hadn't replicated his exact protocols. That the electromagnetic fields needed to be calibrated specifically for each person. That the Swedish study used different equipment. But the scientific community became skeptical. The God helmet fell out of favor. Persinger died in 2018 without the replication studies he needed to prove his theory. So did the God helmet work? Did it actually stimulate religious experiences through electromagnetic fields? Or was it all placebo? The answer is, we still don't know. But here's what we do know. Religious experiences correlate with specific patterns of brain activity. When people pray, meditate, or report feeling spiritual presence, certain regions light up on brain scans. The temporal lobes are involved. So are the parietal lobes, which handle your sense of self and spatial awareness. When the parietal lobes quiet down, you lose your sense of boundaries. The distinction between self and other dissolves. You feel merged with everything. This is what mystics describe as ego death or cosmic unity. When the temporal lobes become hyperactive, you perceive meaningful patterns and presences. You feel like reality is communicating with you. Like there's intention and intelligence behind events. These are brain states. They can be measured. They correlate with neurochemistry, serotonin, dopamine, endorphins all play roles. They can be induced through meditation, prayer, psychedelics, or potentially electromagnetic stimulation. So what does this mean for religious experience? Maybe it means religious experiences are just brain states, and therefore not real contact with anything divine. God is a hallucination produced by specific neural patterns. Or maybe it means that religious experiences are how our brains perceive real spiritual realities. That the divine exists, and our temporal lobes are the antenna that picks up the signal. That brain activity doesn't disprove spirituality any more than having eyes disproves the existence of light. Or maybe the question is wrong. Maybe the distinction between brain state and real experience is false. Maybe consciousness is all we have, and experiences that feel real are real, regardless of their neurological origins. The God helmet failed to prove its central claim. But it succeeded in raising the question, what does it mean if we can artificially create experiences that feel divine? If you put on a helmet and feel God's presence, and that experience is indistinguishable from what a mystic feels during deep prayer, then what's the difference? Is one real and the other fake? Or are they the same experience triggered by different means? And if religious experiences can be induced artificially, does that make them less meaningful?